So in the last video, we closed by noting that Hobbes' answer to the first fundamental question of political philosophy, why have some government rather than none at all, is still very, very influential. So many people accept that the role of government is to enforce a social contract, maybe to define the sort of contours of the social contract, to make the laws, and then to enforce them. And that provides sufficient justification for having some government rather than none at all. Hobbes' answer to the second question, what kind of government should we have? He says a totalitarian dictatorship is much less influential, which raises the question, why should we look at his answer? And I said the reason why we should look at his answer is because many aspects of Hobbes' answer to that question, although people don't accept that it leads to, we should have a totalitarian dictatorship, many of the reasons he offers for having a totalitarian dictatorship still influence people and still have a lot of push, and consequently, many aspects of our society are based on his kinds of reasons. So let's look at a few of these aspects of our society. So we'll start with this. Quite often, people are inclined to emphasize security at the expense of liberty. So people are inclined to say, let's give up some liberty in order to gain some security. So one example is mass surveillance. So remember Edward Snowden from the extra credit assignment, if you did that. He revealed that the National Security Agency and other intelligence agencies in the United States aim to collect every electronic communication worldwide, including every U.S. citizen electronic communication. So every phone call, email, text, video chat, all of the location data from your phone, and so on and so forth, they're collecting it or trying to collect it. And when Snowden revealed this to people, some members of Congress called for his execution. Now, why would they do that? The answer, at least the answer they typically give, has the following form. Security is paramount. The main goal of government is to ensure people's security, and collecting this information helps ensure people's security. And people don't understand that, they won't support that, and so by revealing to Snowden that this was going on, he was interfering with government performing its main role of providing people with security. Another way in which people emphasize security at the expense of liberty is by imprisoning more people rather than risking higher crime. And many people in the United States are willing to make that trade-off. In fact, more so than most countries in the world. So here's a chart from the World Prison Brief from the Institute for Criminal Policy Research, a kind of neutral policy research group. And what they're doing is investigating the number of people imprisoned per 100,000 in the population by country. So in Iceland, you have 38 people in prison for every 100,000 people in the population. In the Netherlands, you have 59 people in prison for every 100,000 people in the population, and so on. And we can go along here and see that things go up and up as you get to countries that imprison more and more of their people. But the United States is an outlier. There are some small countries that are not included here, like the Seychelles. But even when you include them, the United States is still more or less an outlier. So the United States imprisons far, this is from some older data from a few years before. I couldn't find one that had even small countries from 2018. But the United States imprisons far more people than any other large country that you would think of as sort of like roughly comparable, like Germany, for example, or the United Kingdom. Far more people per 100,000. A far higher percent of the population is imprisoned. And that's because the idea that it's better to give up some liberty to get more security gets a lot of purchase in the United States compared to in these other places. It's part of the reason anyway. That wasn't always the case. So until 1970, the US had a fairly stable imprisonment rate per 100,000. And then in the 1970s, you can see it grows a bit over the decade of the 70s, but not a lot, but a bit. And then it sort of grows quite a bit over the 80s, and then skyrockets during the 90s. You may have heard of the 1994 crime bill that played a big role in this skyrocketing. Wasn't the only factor, but one of the factors that played a role. And the US continues to be an outlier in this respect. And that's not to say the US is wrong, just to be clear. The point is, there's a legitimate political question. How should we trade liberty against security? That is, how much should be we willing to sacrifice liberty in order to gain security? And the United States provides, compared to other countries, has compared to other countries a very Hobbesian perspective on this. Okay, another example, spending heavily on national defense, thinking that you're willing to sacrifice some liberty, specifically have the government seize your money, seize something from your paycheck, from your income, in order to have a very secure nation, one in which there's a lot of national defense spending. Now, this is, of course, on the assumption that the national defense spending actually increases security. That assumption may be false, but most people who argue for heavy national defense spending do claim that it's because it will increase security. And the United States seems to have a very Hobbesian stand on this. That is, the stand is the role of government is to provide security. That's the sort of foremost role of government. So we should be willing to give up liberty, have the government seize some of our money, if it will be spent in a way that will increase security. And here's a graph illustrating just where the United States stands on this compared to other countries. You can see that the United States spends far more on the military than other countries. Now, some people will point out in response that this is partly because the United States, in effect, acts as a kind of world police and provides security for these other places. Maybe that's so. At any rate, the United States is the one who's providing the security and willing to spend to provide the security, willing to give up the liberty of doing what you want with your money by having the government seize some of that money in order to get security. And that's a very Hobbesian position. Hobbes would support this. This is for discretionary budget within the United States. Discretionary budget is money that needs to be renewed on a regular basis, say every year. So it doesn't include, for example, ordinary spending on Social Security, which doesn't get renewed every year. You can't just say, like, this year we're not going to spend anything on Social Security. This is money that gets renewed every year, and about half of it, year in, year out. This isn't like 2019 is some abnormal year. Basically, every year, about half of that budget is spent on defense. So it looks like we're emphasizing the government's role of providing security over other roles it might play, like providing veterans benefits and services, or housing assistance, or whatever else the government might do. So this graphic here illustrates that year in, year out, the government chooses security as a kind of central function rather than other functions that it might be performing. And that's a very Hobbesian choice to make. Next, targeted assassination. So the United States conducts targeted assassination. It has conducted targeted assassination against a U.S. citizen. That says assassination. It should be assassination. It has conducted targeted assassination against a U.S. citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki. He was not an operational figure in al-Qaeda. He was sort of a propagandist, intellectual defender of jihad. Not always, but towards the end of his life when he was killed. He was a kind of intellectual defender of jihad, of holy war against the United States. And he was a U.S. citizen, and he was assassinated. And in this case, the idea was very clear. The idea was that al-Awlaki is rendering us insecure. He's increasing the risk of terrorist attacks through his effective propaganda. So we'll assassinate him. And there's no greater theft of liberty than taking someone's life. So the idea is we're willing to trade the greatest liberty of all, your life, for increase in security. Okay, another way in which the United States emphasizes security over, is very Hobbesian, is that it often emphasizes state secrets over informed citizens. And you can imagine, we didn't talk about this particular issue in Hobbes, but you can imagine that Hobbes, of course, would say the state can have whatever secrets it wants, and citizens being informed just isn't important. They don't need to be involved in some sort of democratic decision-making process because they shouldn't play any role in choosing the laws. Instead, the leader should choose the laws. So the leader can be as secretive as he or she wants, and there's no need to inform citizens. And the United States has pursued this kind of way of thinking in many ways. Not in every way, of course. We have a really great First Amendment, which grants people all sorts of rights, in effect, grants people rights to information. But here's an example in which it goes the other way. So there's pervasive government spying, and that's in effect state secrets. That's in effect not allowing citizens to have secrets. compare that to prosecution of government officials for leaking classified information under the Espionage Act of 1917 and its extensions. So these are not cases where, although the act was originally intended to prosecute people who leaked information to spies, these are not cases of people leaking information to spies. These are cases of people leaking information to journalists so that the journalists can publish it so that it can be consumed by the American people. And they're prosecuted under this act, including 8 prosecutions under Obama. I mentioned Obama because prior to Obama, there hadn't been since 1917 very many prosecutions under this act. There were 8 prosecutions for government officials leaking classified information to the press. And that's a case where you're saying, look, the state should have its secrets. It's allowed to have its secrets. And we don't need informed citizens making decisions about these things. That's exactly what Hobbes would think. Stop this video there and continue considering aspects of Hobbes's way of thinking about what kind of society we should have that are still influential today in the next video.